The lie didn't start as something dramatic. It started as something practical. A small adjustment. A harmless omission. A version of myself that felt easier to explain. At the time, I told myself it was temporary. That I would correct it later. I didn't. Years passed before I realized I was no longer pretending to be someone else. I had become them. Most people think lies are loud. That they announce themselves with guilt, panic, fear of exposure. But the most dangerous lies are quiet. They settle into your life slowly, until one day you forget what the truth sounded like. I remember the first time I chose the lie. Someone asked me a simple question about who I was, what I wanted, where I was going. I hesitated. The honest answer felt complicated. Heavy. Inconvenient. So I simplified it. The relief was immediate. The version of me I presented was easier to understand. Easier to accept. It fit neatly into expectations. And people responded well to it. They nodded. Smiled. Moved on. That should have been my warning. Instead, it became my strategy. Every time honesty felt risky, I polished the lie a little more. Not by inventing stories, but by trimming away anything that didn't fit the image. Doubts. Contradictions. Desires that made others uncomfortable. I didn't think of it as lying. I thought of it as adaptation. Over time, people stopped asking deeper questions. They believed they already knew me. And I learned how to live inside that belief. The strange thing is, the lie didn't make me unhappy right away. It made me successful. Opportunities came more easily when I sounded certain. Relationships were smoother when I didn't complicate things with truth. My life became stable, predictable, socially acceptable. From the outside, it looked like confidence. Inside, it felt like suffocation. I began to notice how carefully I monitored myself. Every word. Every reaction. Every opinion. I wasn't expressing myself, I was maintaining a character. And characters don't get tired all at once. They wear down gradually. I lost track of when I stopped checking in with myself. When I stopped asking what I wanted. When my inner life became quieter and quieter, like a radio fading into static. The lie had done its job too well. I didn't have a breakdown. I didn't hit a dramatic low. I simply reached a point where nothing felt real anymore. Achievements felt hollow. Praise felt misplaced. Connections felt thin, like they could collapse if I leaned on them too hard. I was surrounded by people who believed in a version of me that didn't exist. And the worst part was this, I had taught them to. There were moments, late at night, alone, when fragments of the truth tried to surface. Thoughts I pushed away during the day. Questions I refused to answer. Who would I be if I stopped performing? What would remain if the lie collapsed? And would anyone stay? Those questions terrified me more than exposure. So I kept going. I told myself that everyone does this. That adulthood is about compromise. That authenticity is overrated. That stability matters more than truth. Those were comforting lies layered on top of the first one. The longer I lived this way, the harder it became to imagine another option. The lie wasn't something I told, it was something I lived. Undoing it felt impossible. Not because people wouldn't understand, but because I didn't know how to explain myself without it. I had built my entire life on a simplified version of who I was. And simplification comes with a cost. You lose nuance, depth, contradiction. You lose yourself. The moment everything started to crack wasn't public. It was private, quiet, almost invisible. I was sitting alone, looking at a future I had carefully constructed, and I felt nothing. No excitement. No fear. Just a deep, unsettling emptiness. That's when I understood something I had been avoiding for years. The lie hadn't protected me. It had erased me. And if I didn't stop, would reach the end of my life having been deeply understood by everyone, except myself. Once I saw the lie clearly, I couldn't unsee it. It followed me everywhere. In conversations where my answers came too quickly. In moments when people praised me for traits I didn't recognize as my own. In plans for the future that sounded reasonable but felt strangely disconnected from my body, like they belonged to someone else. I started to feel like a fraud, not because I was deceiving others, but because I was betraying myself every single day. The pressure built quietly. There was no single breaking point, just an accumulation of moments where I caught myself hesitating before speaking, calculating reactions, choosing safety over honesty by reflex. I realized how automatic it had become. I didn't know how to stop. Telling the truth felt dangerous now. Not because it was shocking, but because it would unravel everything at once. Relationships built on assumptions. Decisions made based on a false image. A future designed for a person who wasn't real. The ethical dilemma haunted me. Was it kinder to keep lying, preserving stability and avoiding harm? Or was it more honest, and cruel, to destroy the illusion I had helped create? I told myself that silence was still the better option. That the damage of truth would be worse than the cost of the lie. That I could adjust internally without disrupting the external structure of my life. That was another lie. You can't live truthfully on the inside while performing a fiction on the outside. The tension becomes unbearable. It leaks into your body, your sleep, your sense of time. I began to feel exhausted in a way rest couldn't touch. My thoughts looped endlessly. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, tight chest, shallow breath, a constant sense of being watched, even when I was alone. I started fantasizing about escape. Not running away physically, but stepping out of my life quietly. Becoming less visible. Less involved. I thought that if I reduced myself enough, the lie might shrink too. It didn't. Instead, I felt myself disappearing again, this time from the inside out. There was a night when everything nearly collapsed. I was alone, sitting in the dark, replaying years of conversations in my head, wondering how many moments would have gone differently if I had been honest from the start. I felt grief for the life I might have lived. For the relationships that could have been deeper, messier, real. For the version of myself that never learned to speak up when it mattered. That grief was heavier than fear. And in that weight, something shifted. I understood that the lie wasn't just about what I had said, it was about what I had never allowed myself to be. It was about choosing acceptance over authenticity so many times that I no longer trusted my own voice. If I didn't act now, I would spend the rest of my life maintaining a character I no longer recognized. So I made a decision, not to confess everything at once, not to burn my life down dramatically, but to stop reinforcing the lie. I began with small acts of honesty. Saying, "I don't know," instead of pretending certainty. Admitting discomfort. Allowing pauses instead of filling silence with polished answers. Some people noticed. Some didn't. But I noticed. Each honest moment felt terrifying and relieving at the same time, like stepping onto unstable ground after years of standing perfectly still. I wasn't fixing the past. I was reclaiming the present. Still, the question remained, would partial truth be enough? Or was I just finding a more subtle way to keep hiding? That question followed me relentlessly. Because deep down, I knew the answer. The lie would never fully release me unless I was willing to risk losing what it had built. And that meant facing the possibility that when the truth finally surfaced, not everyone would stay. That was the price. And I wasn't sure yet if I was brave enough to pay it. The truth didn't arrive as a confession. It arrived as a refusal. A refusal to keep answering questions with rehearsed certainty. A refusal to keep nodding along with plans that no longer felt like mine. A refusal to keep betraying myself quietly so everyone else could stay comfortable. I had imagined that honesty would feel explosive. That it would tear my life apart in a single moment. Instead, it unfolded slowly, unevenly, in fragments. And that made it harder. There was no clear ending to the lie. No dramatic reveal that reset everything. Just a series of moments where I chose differently than I used to. Moments where I didn't correct people when they misunderstood me, but also didn't reinforce the misunderstanding. Some relationships shifted almost immediately. Conversations became awkward. Silences grew longer. I saw confusion in people's eyes, followed by subtle disappointment. They weren't angry. They were unsettled. I had changed the rules without announcing it. Others didn't notice at all. They continued interacting with the old version of me, unaware that I was slowly stepping out of that shape. That hurt in a different way. It made me realize how little of me they had ever really seen. There were losses I couldn't avoid. Certain connections faded when I stopped performing the role they expected. Opportunities slipped away when I no longer fit the image that had made me appealing. Stability cracked in places where it had depended on my silence. That was the price of truth. And I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights when regret hit me from a new angle, not regret for lying, but regret for waiting so long to stop. I wondered who I could have been if I had trusted myself earlier. How different my life might look if I hadn't built it on convenience and fear. That grief was sharp. But it was clean. Unlike the numbness I had lived with before, this pain meant something. It was evidence that I was present again. That I was no longer watching my life from a distance. Slowly, something unexpected happened. I began to feel solid. Not confident. Not fearless. Just real. My opinions felt like they belonged to me. My choices, even the uncertain ones, felt grounded in intention instead of habit. I stopped measuring my worth by how easily I was understood. Being misunderstood was no longer the worst outcome. Losing myself was. I didn't fix everything. I didn't suddenly become brave or outspoken or perfectly authentic. I still hesitate. I still choose silence sometimes. But now I know the difference between silence as protection and silence as self-erasure. And I don't confuse them anymore. The biggest realization came quietly, one morning, when I noticed that I wasn't monitoring myself the way I used to. I wasn't checking every word, anticipating every reaction. I was simply responding. Living. The lie had taken years to build, and it took time to dismantle. But piece by piece, I reclaimed space inside myself that I didn't even realize was missing. I learned that identity isn't something you declare once and defend forever. It's something you choose repeatedly, especially when it costs you something. Especially when it threatens what you've built. I don't blame my past self for lying. That version of me was trying to survive. Trying to belong. Trying to be acceptable in a world that rewards simplicity and certainty. But I don't live there anymore. I live in the space where answers are allowed to change. Where honesty is sometimes uncomfortable. Where being real matters more than being liked. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this: you can lie to everyone about who you are and still succeed. You can build a life that looks right and feels wrong. You can be admired, trusted, even loved, for someone you're not. But eventually, the cost comes due. And when it does, you face a choice. Continue performing until nothing of you remains. Or risk everything to finally be seen, first by yourself. This isn't a story about exposure. It's a confession about delay. About how easy it is to become invisible while everyone thinks they know you. And about the quiet, terrifying freedom that comes when you stop lying long enough to hear your own voice again.